Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends upon when you're listening. Welcome to The Solution. Nothing changes if we change nothing. And we are back after a short break. Well, I guess not so short. What, about 3-4 weeks?
It's been a while. It's been a while. And we see each other, you and I.
Right, all the time.
With the listeners and viewers, they don't get to see our presence or hear our voices.
I guess we should tell them where we've been, what we've been doing.
We've been busy, like busy doing trainings. Mostly trainings.
Right. Sometimes people forget our main job is the New York City Prevention Resource Center.
Yes.
And working with coalitions, but we did a 5-day virtual training.
Mm-hmm. We even had, at the beginning of the previous month, where we actually took another break, was we had CACA, so that kind of threw us off also. Although we did have a episode afterwards.
But I think that was the last one. I think we just did that one, and then we dove into the training.
We spent a lot of time prepping on the training and even doing it. We did just as much prep work for the training as we did for the training. I mean, actually doing the training. So it was a lot.
Yeah, definitely. But we are back and glad to be. We were just talking before we got on the air about the changes now. New York City schools are going back on Monday full time. Everybody, right?
Yeah. Hopefully I get some more clarification tonight from his school. But how it was first explained to me, via email, even television, hybrid learning. Those kids who opted to do the hybrid would go in twice a week or anywhere from 2 to 3 days a week, and then and swap in off because of proximity and also logistics and people being around each other. But not too long ago, I overheard my son talking to his advisor, and they were saying, "No, we're coming back Monday." I was like, "What is that?" My son was like, "No, Tuesday," because that's what he's heard. I've heard via the news, via the school social media, and now to hear that they're coming back, I have certain reservations for that. I do want him to be in the presence of a teacher and other people his own age, his peers, and so on, but not at the will of his health. I don't want to compromise his health or anyone's health. And he's 14, but we still don't understand this virus.
Sure.
And I was sharing with Ronnie offline about, I understand why, schools are open, for a variety of reasons, abuse of children, domestic violence at home, possibly drug misuse at home. Some parents aren't allowed to be home to they have to go to work and their children are at home. So, and those are the bad reasons, and the good reasons, like I mentioned earlier, is the social interaction. So I think that's a good reason for young people to get back together. But again, I don't know what it looks like. I'm still unclear if it's all, however large the school is, are they all coming back? Because that's what it seemed like. Because my son says to his advisor, I thought I was coming, like I said earlier, I thought I was coming back Tuesday. And they said, no, you're coming back Monday. I'm like, what's going on? When was this decision made?
Well, you have a meeting tonight, so you should find out. But there's a lot of things as we come back. We don't even know when we'll be back in our office. Predicting more towards the fall than the summer, because we have very close proximity within our office. But we're all getting everything in gear. I have my vaccine appointment April 22nd for the first one. Being in New York, it's hard. It was hard to get. Probably could have gotten it sooner if I kept up at like some of the drugstore sites and things like that. But I like having the appointment set, and I'm ready to roll with it. And it's just this way I can plan around it when I know when it is, and make sure to maybe take the day off afterwards, because I don't know how I'm going to react.
No one knows. And I shared with you prior to my mom she got her second shot this past weekend, and she said she feels totally fine. She was like, yeah. It was like, I was checking up on her. How are you? Okay. She was, I'm cool. We hung out. We sat down and we talked, and she seems perfectly fine. Same old. So I hope the same for you, Ronnie, when you get yours.
Thank you.
that you come on playing guitar, like I'm okay. I even have more energy. Like that would be a plus. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're all concerned. We don't know, but I definitely don't want to get COVID, and I don't want to bring it into my home with a spouse who has an immune disorder,
Absolutely.
So it's just, it's hard. It's a hard choice, but I'm committed to getting my vaccine and taking it from there.
And that's my other concern, with children going back to school. And I live in neighborhoods where I see people I live in a neighborhood where I've seen people not wear their masks, not social distance. And then we don't fully know how this thing is passed. At one point it was 6 feet apart, and it was like then in the summer it was like 10 feet apart. It's like if you're jogging, don't jog behind someone because if they sneeze, I'm like, we don't know. So I'm like, we're sending kids back to school who some of them live with their grandparents, some who live with older relatives, right, who might not have gotten the vaccine, or still waiting to get the vaccine. And even still, like my mom has been telling her friends, hey, I still can't see you. Even though I got the vaccine, I still have to wait to make sure that I'm all clear. So even still, you can have the vaccine and you still have to wait.
And they're saying that, there are a lot of people who are, well, not a lot, but there's people who have reported getting the virus after they've been vaccinated, but it was the first shot and they didn't wait long enough anyway, so their immunity, even with the first shot, wasn't very high. Most of those cases can be traced to people who just haven't had time to build immunity.
Right.
But I know the schools have not been a place where it's been passed a lot.
Yes.
And the schools here have been very good about closing down. I mean, at least where I am on Long Island, when a school, has cases, they close the school for a couple of weeks and then they reopen again 2 weeks later. So, hopefully that will continue. But there haven't been a lot of cases through the schools. There's been more through social gatherings.
Absolutely. Again, it isn't an attack on the schools. It is what you're talking about, those social gatherings outside of the schools. It's not because, like, again, I don't know what other people do. And live your life. I tell people all the time, live your life. But, don't, not at the detriment of mine, or, my family. But, he's going to go back to school. He's a little upset about it because his concern is he doesn't want to catch COVID. He's afraid. And I told him, whatever happens, you have me, you have family members, and you're pretty young and you're healthy. You'll be all right, and we'll all be all right. So I do my best to keep positivity in his life and remind him that, we're going to be okay. We're going to have fun at the same time.
But it's great you talk about it because so much fills people's heads, and young people must be really scared right now. I mean,
absolutely.
We've been kind of scared. I can only imagine how scared they are.
When my daughter found out that my mom got her vaccine, like, she called my mother, was like, what did you do? Why didn't you tell me? So she's like freaking out because she's a college student. So she doesn't understand, she doesn't even understand the whole process of the virus and the vaccine, what have you. So she called my mom, like, I heard you got the vaccine. Why didn't you tell me? I'm concerned, I'm sad. I'm like, my mom was like, I'm okay. So she reassured her too, like, I'm okay. I needed, like she said, I needed to do this. I needed to, because again, my daughter is in college and she goes away, she visits my mom. So she's like, we have to protect each other. Now, if I want you to come visit me, I have to be able to, this is my mom talking, I have to be able to protect you and myself. Because if you're in a school where there's a possibility when there's a case of kids young people who have it, and you are in proximity of them, you bring it to me. So I have to be able to protect us, and I want to see you. So she, put a positive spin on it for her, but yeah, it's tough. People are concerned and confused.
Understandably. But, we're pushing our way through. Things are getting better on some levels. And I mean, we're about to embark on a whole bunch of new projects and
absolutely.
And fortify our NYC POP and make it more of a citywide, well, it is citywide, but involving providers and just really strengthening it and getting into policy development now. So it's all good. We've made lemon out of lemonades this year. We've all had a rough year, but we've made it work. And it shows how resilient we are as people.
Absolutely. And I'm happy spring is here, or it's coming. I know your feeling. I know your feelings.
Oh, no. I like the 4 seasons, though.
Okay.
I mean, I enjoy winter, and we just didn't have one for like 4 years.
No, absolutely right.
I wanted a real winter, and we got it. And now I'm like, okay, I got a little spring fever. When I was a kid, every time I'd see a robin redbreast, I would count it. And I'd always start out counting them. And then when I got to like 30, I'd be like, how many did I see? I'd lose count. And I saw my first one the other day.
Nice.
And I was like, okay, there's number one. And the birds above we have birds living in our roof. I mean, literally, they live under the shingles, like when you first get near the back entrance to the house we rent. And I've gotten to know the birds so well that they fly a little too close. You know? I'm like, no, you guys, I'm your friend, but not that friendly. Because it kind of creeps me out when I feel like wings fluttering by my ear. That won't work. But I've gotten to know them so well that I've named some of them and I know who they are. So I've got to think about animals. And, you know, sometimes people see me look away like I just did now, but I have to because I have 2 dogs who are 11 and a half, but behave like toddlers. And I have to make sure that they're not getting into trouble. But yeah, no, I'm glad. It's all good. I don't want a really hot summer. I don't like that, but I appreciate the 4 seasons when we really have them.
No, I appreciate the first seasons. I'm actually similar to what you share with us, or me offline, about the abrupt change in the seasons. That's where it's like, wait a minute, it went from 30 degrees to 90, 95 degrees. I need to be weaned in also. I need to be weaned in. Like, please give me a 45 and a 60. You know, don't just jump and then drop. I'm like, this isn't cool. This is not cool. It's definitely not cool. But like you said, you know, the turnaround as far as like, you know, the virus and so forth, of people getting vaccinated, people are there's a lot of lessons that has been learned over this past year. As far as like, you know, people fully understand what cabin fever is to the fullest extent.
And how much we need hugs.
Yes, oh my God. It's the importance of social interaction and the importance of downtime, you know, because it's like we either had too much downtime or not enough downtime. It's like
we haven't had much downtime.
No, not at all. Yeah, not at all. But even like balance, it's like it's been an adjustment period, and I keep hearing people via the news or in social media, I want to get back to normal. I'm like, again, what is normal? Because right now this is normal. Yeah. You know, like
right, and what's normal so great?
You know? Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. What's normal so great? You know, especially with what's going on in society now, is kind of like disheartening and unfortunate with, you know, what's being seen on the news. But as far as from there it goes, like, I'm always talking and someone interrupts me. That happens every day.
Well, we do have a guest, so should I let our guest in?
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay. So we'll wait till you connect to audio.
While Dr. Renee connects. Oh, purple is my favorite color. FYI, purple is my favorite color. The color of royalty, the color of kings and queens, the color of one of my favorite artists of all time, Prince, formerly known as the artist.
The artist formerly known as. Welcome. We're so glad you could join us.
You're muted.
I saw, you know, that still happens every now and again. It's the whole year, and I still mute myself sometimes.
Oh, I do it all the time. I think I do it more now than I had been because I've just gotten lackadaisical about it. You know? But we are glad you're here. Welcome. We're going to give you a moment to introduce yourself. Why don't you tell everybody who you are?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for having me. I am Dr. Renee Amin. I am also known in the world as the Pink Love Specialist because I'm all about helping heal the heart to create better and build better relationships in your life. I am also an LGBTQ faith-based trauma specialist and a relationship wellness expert. So I am all about connecting and how relationships show up in our lives, whether it's religious or just interpersonal or professional. I'm just all about love and being. So that's me. Which
is why we were so happy to have you come on the show, because I mean, I've been to one of your trainings and I've heard you talk, and I'm just so impressed with your work. And it's such an important type of work because for so long, nobody was really responding to that kind of trauma that so many people in the queer community have grown up with. And we've seen it in action at trainings where people just weren't sensitive enough to be able to say, oh, I shouldn't be presenting this because people may react. I should present it in a different way. I think that's what it is. It's about presenting it in a different way. But so tell us, about, what your program basically and the work that you've been doing and are doing at this time.
Well, I have had the honor of being able to do conversations. It started during my doctoral process. My dissertation was centered around LGBTQ spiritually traumatized individuals. And so I started having discussions and chats and workshops around healing faith trauma. And that birthed LGBTQ Faith Matters, which now has allowed me to go into spaces and places offering conversation around what LGBTQ faith-based trauma looks like and how to heal it as far as the relationship part. But that started it's almost been 10 years where I wanted to be a life coach. That's what I wanted to do. And so I went to training for it because all the life coaches I knew were just telling people what to do. They weren't really coaching them. They were just living vicariously through their clients. And so I said, I want to learn how to do this. And once I got into it, and what I really realized is I had been being that all my life for my friends and for my family. And then I started working with couples, especially LGBTQ couples, around everything from dating to getting married. And because I was in ministry at the time, I used to be in, I call it the pulpit. And I dealt with my own trauma, church hurt, or however you want to identify it. But I realized that the trauma was deeper than just what happened in the church. It had been long going. And so in having that conversation and having to put my life back together and put my faith back together, this whole Pink Love Wellness was born. And that's what I do. I mean, I am invited I've been in some very tough spaces to have this conversation around LGBTQ work. Everyone is not always receptive. I'm thankful that I was able to learn how to engage and be polite without playing into the stereotype that someone is already walking into the room with. So at this point, it's like becoming its own, I don't want to call it an animal because that's not really what it is, but it's becoming its own entity. And now I'm starting to be invited into rooms to have conversation with organizations that, in my mind, I would never have thought that they would want to have this conversation because it just seems so not fitting. But, God has other plans. They always say more than we can imagine, think, or ask. And so here I am.
Yeah, that the term faith-based trauma, I had never heard the term until I heard you say it. And I'm curious where that came from, because it's something that people have been shy around. They haven't wanted to talk about it because people look at faith one way and they're afraid. They're walking on glass a lot of times, or on eggshells, being very careful not to say it wrong. But when you said that term, it made so much sense because I've had people in my life who've really been affected by it. I had a sponsor. I'm in 12-step and I have him for 23 and a half years. And my second sponsor was in Tennessee, and my second sponsor told me soon after we met, well, I'm a trans woman. And I said, yeah, okay, what do you want for dessert? And because she wanted me to know this when I asked her to sponsor me, and I was like, okay, you have great recovery and you're a wonderful, beautiful woman. What else do I need to know? And during the time that I knew her, she was going to a lot of different churches down in Tennessee, and they kept rejecting her, and they kept telling her, this is not how God intended you to be, and it really messed with her head. And after several years of knowing her, she called me one day and said, Well, I've decided that I'm going to stop my treatment and I'm going to reverse, the hormonal treatment, and I'm going to go back to living as a man. And my heart broke. It really broke. And I asked why. And she said, well, I realize now that if God had wanted me to be a woman, God would have made me that way. And I knew I heard the brainwashing, and I heard that particular church talking. And, I knew that, if that's what she wanted, great. But after all she told me through the times we knew each other, I knew it was definitely the pressure and giving in finally and just buying into what they said. And the trauma was so deep. All during the time I knew her, she'd go back to visit her family. She'd have to take off the makeup, wear loose clothes, and tie her hair back, and just tell them that she was. I don't want to say the name, her name, but the male name that she had used prior to transitioning into. And I don't like to even say transitioning because I think she always knew she was a woman. It's just a matter of it becoming who she was. But it was just heartbreaking. And I knew that came all around the faith-based community that she engaged with. There's many that are very welcoming and loving, but down there, it can be a little different. So when you talked about that, it just clicked and it made sense to me. So I'm curious where that term came from.
Well, when I was doing my research, I ran across the term. I do find that it's often used in conjunction with religious trauma. But my stance on it is, so religious trauma often just looks at how the teaching of religion comes into the conversation. Why I looked at it from a faith-based lens, because what I recognize is when you continuously tell a person that there's something wrong with their faith, that the God of their understanding did not create them to be that way, does not love them, they're an abomination, they're not supposed to be here, and all of those other things. Added with the fact that it doesn't just come through religion and church, it also can come through the family, it also can come through the government when they start changing the laws that don't really affect them. It can also come from society. This idea who you're supposed to be in your sexual orientation, and your gender expression, and your gender identity. It becomes so much more bigger because some people are not speaking what they've learned from religion. They're speaking what they've learned from someone else. Because everyone that is having this conversation is not necessarily religious. They're just being homophobic, biphobic, transphobic, but they're doing it from the space of what they're taught to believe. So in that, I had to extract out just this religious trauma because this person or this system is not built on something that they were taught through religion. It's just something that they were systemically taught. And so that's why I kind of had to break out and say, no, this is not just about religious trauma. This is about faith-based trauma. Anytime you cause someone to begin to question who the God of their understanding is to them and who they are to God, that affects their faith journey, that affects their faith development and their process. So that's where the conversation begins, not just the religious part, because what if they've never even set foot in a church? So now you've given name to something that isn't true to this individual. It is the belief that is true, but it is not the institution that is true.
I want to say thank you for making that distinction of the two, because I often talk to friends and colleagues about conditioning and how sometimes we're conditioned to do certain things, to believe certain things, because if our faith said these things are harmful, and our faith usually tells us to uplift each other. So I really appreciate you separating those two, because I think that's where a lot of trauma comes from. Me being a Black kid from Harlem, growing up in the city, hanging up in the corner. They didn't know that I was a church going kid. They was like, "Oh, you're in the corner doing wrong." No, I'm not. I just came from playing basketball. So separating those two, I think, is a positive. But I do want to say to all the listeners, please Google Dr. Rainier. Please. There's so much information. And can you You mentioned this, like you said, like 2 or 3 times. Can you go into, and I'm sorry, Ronnie, you're probably going to bring me back. Can you go into a little bit more about the Pink Love Wellness? You said it a few times. Can you talk about that? I mean, I'm from Harlem. We wear pink and purple, so.
Well, Pink Love Wellness came from, so I'm really big into crystals. I love crystals, the properties of crystals, the healing attributes of crystals. And so I started, learning about the chakra system and, how that shows up, those energy fields within our body. So oftentimes when you see the chakra colors, you'll see, red, orange, yellow, blue, why my brain? Blue, indigo, and violet, come into play, and it usually is inverted. You see it from the bottom to the top. So when you look up things about the heart chakra, you often find stuff like jade, and they say the color is green and all of that. The secondary color of the heart chakra is pink. So that's why when you look at things like pink roses, it's usually around friendship and warmth and not necessarily romantic love, because that's where the red roses come in. Or you'll hear people talk about just like rose quartz. When you go into places and you see rose quartz, it's again about the warmth and the friendship and this and all of the things that make the heart the heart. And so for me, I wanted to work with the things that make the heart, because at the end of the day, your mind can tell you something to do. Sometimes your body can tell you something to do, but there's a piece of your heart that at the core of it all, even if your mind has been altered by trauma or other adverse experiences, even if your body is affected by chemicals and toxins and everything else, there's still that moment while you're going through the things in your life that you'll have that heart moment where your heart will say, this doesn't feel good. Where your heart will say, I know that I love them. And your heart will also tell you, but I know I have to leave them alone. So there's something in here that is innately in there that is different than how it shows up in your mind and how it shows up in your body and other elements of your being. The heart is. And so that's what made me really come from the lens of Pink Love. And that's how I became the Pink Love specialist.
Well, thank you for the explanation. I was curious. I looked it up. I was like, reading words is different from actually speaking to the individual who participates in whatever act it is. And you sharing that, I'm big into colors. Like I said, I'm from Harlem. We wear whatever color we want. We don't care, and like I said, but I want to go back to what you were talking about earlier in trauma. And I share this all the time, growing up in the hood, growing up as a Black child, we don't necessarily talk about trauma. We don't, that word is sometimes foreign to us. We know stereotype. We know the word stereotype. We know the word stigma. But when we hear the word trauma, it's usually when we go to the hospital, we get a bruise on the head, or, it's trauma to the body, but not trauma to the inner soul. Can you talk about, can you talk a little bit more about how trauma affects, youth in LGBTQ plus, and what does that look like as far as because again, like I said, we don't normally talk about it, especially coming from a brown person, but what does that dialogue look like now?
So, I chuckle every time you talk about, being in Harlem. I'm from North Philadelphia. And so
it's all good. It's all good.
It's a similar concept. Like there's a certain understanding being in the hood. Like it just is. And, I'm just saying there was a certain understanding being in the hood. That conversation around what happens in the home stays in the home. In many communities of color, especially Black communities, we're not always encouraged not everyone is encouraged, because some people are encouraged, but not everyone is encouraged to have this conversation around how we're functioning inside of our experience. And although I talk about trauma from a very academic place, I'm clear that when I'm talking to an individual, I don't want to speak to them like they're traumatic, because at the end of the day, those kind of words will sometimes, when you have a diagnosis, sometimes we start to live inside of that. Oh, they said that I have trauma, so now, there's nowhere for me to go from here. We lay it, we lay inside those words. But the big thing about when you talk about it from a larger space of trauma is that we often look at it as this one incident that took place. Someone may have been assaulted, someone may have been, harmed in a way, that one thing. But when you're having a conversation with an LGBTQ youth, especially an LGBTQ youth of color, you're coming to the table with an intersectionality of trauma. It's the fact that they're Black. There's things that come with being Black. There's things that come with being LGBTQ. There's things that come with being, whatever your gender identification is or your gender expression is. And so when you have come to the table already experiencing some childhood experiences, maybe you came from a home that was a little dysfunctional. Maybe you have had people tell you things about yourself, or again, that conversation of who you are in God and all this other stuff. This usually happens in a complex way. These are usually multiple experiences over a course of time. So what happens is people sit down and say, I want to get to the root of the problem. But it's hard to get to the root of the problem when it's not a problem. It's a multitude of things that have happened for this individual. So how do you address the health and wellness of a person and not just what you think the problem is? Because then you're half helping. Because you got rid of that. Okay, so you got rid of their feelings and emotions around how society is addressing them. You help them feel more confident here. But when they leave school or work or wherever else that they may feel free, and this young person goes home to a home that is homophobic, that is dysfunctional, that is verbally abusive, that is emotionally abusive, there is no way that they could completely thrive. There is no way they could completely thrive because they keep going back into the space that is harming them, that is breaking them, that is taking something away from their self-worth and their self-esteem. So when we are addressing trauma, especially in our youth, we have to understand, or we would like to understand, let me say it that way, that there are a multitude of things that may be happening for them, combined with the fact the hormonal changes that happen in everyday life, puberty and everything else, having your first love, your first kiss, all the stuff that it was a long time ago since I was a teenager, but I remember. I remember people talking down to me in this way, the adults. And they would say to me, oh, you don't have no problems. You're not old enough to have any problems. You're not old enough to ever been through anything. But meanwhile, I was having like the meltdown of my life. At least that's what it felt like. And in some cases, some of the situations that I ended up in, from addiction to sexual assault to all this stuff, I was really having some serious emotions that were going on, but they were brushed aside because I wasn't old enough to have experienced anything. And so that manifested in me getting further into addiction, me getting further into behavior, trying to fix and find and experience some type of normalcy and some type of love. So when you are engaging a young person, whether they are LGBTQ, heterosexual, pansexual, asexual, it is important for you to address them as a person and not an age.
Really,
because you have no way of fully understanding what they're really going through.
I really appreciate you saying that, also addressing a person, that addressing them as a person. Because, you know, being a Black man, you know, you're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to share emotion, you know, or even being a man in general. You know, we aren't allowed to do certain things. We have to man up and do things. And I'm a dad, I have my son. I tell my son, homie, if you want to cry, do your thing. If you want to share anything, let's talk about it. But I do want to ask a question, because we're a year into this thing. Like, how has this work affected the pandemic? Is it like, what does support look like during the pandemic? Or has it changed? Is it less? Is it more? I know it's like 7 questions in one, probably 3 questions.
Well, it depends on what side of the table you sit on. Because if you were able to work from home, maybe not have your household impacted that much, and you were able to save your coins, and the only thing that happened is you're not going into the office anymore, it may have shown up for you different. But if you were like, I lost my 9 to 5, like 1 week into the pandemic, I was like, like how does that work? Like, when did that happen? And I think the support, again, depends on what side of the table you sit, because we have now been able to engage the internet and technology differently. There have been people from all across the world that have access to information now that they might not have had before. They're able to meet people that they have not been able to meet, attend events that were initially only in person, that had no choice but to go virtually. Now people from all over the world get to, you know, participate in those events. And so that therein lies the beauty. The other side of the support are that it doesn't feel so great. And in some cases was beyond affecting to mental health, were people that were isolated from their families. You know, not everyone wanted to get on Zoom. And to be perfectly honest, after about a year of everything being on Zoom, sometimes you mention Zoom to people, they be like, nah, I can't. That's how long? Half an hour? Oh, half an hour, I'm good. 2 hours? No, I can't do that, you know. And so you have that. And then you also had individuals that were in emotionally abusive, physically abusive, psychologically abusive environments, that their only escape was being able to leave the house. Couple that with the hardship of people losing their job, other shifts that were happening across the country, especially financially, and what it was looking like, that, you know, and what was happening in the government, all of those things, the home for some people became a battle zone. And then, you know, and then here's the third part, add the children, who many of them had to go from being able to be in the classroom, now they're at home trying to navigate all of this information. Their school days, they're in front of the computer for 7, 8 hours, and then they cut off the computer, have to sit and do homework for another 2 or 3 hours. They're exhausted. So I think it really depends on where you sat, or still sit, because the pandemic is still going on, to, you know, in the conversation. If you were in a state that shut all the way down like New York did, or you were in a state that was still clubbing it, doing their thing, you know, I really, when I look back over it all, I can see the joys in it from a certain angle, but from the other side, I can see what it unearthed. Some of the things that were already happening that we just didn't pay attention to. But once the world closed off, we had no choice.
Yeah, and I think the important thing too is that we pay attention to what we did learn, because people want to go back to so-called normal. We were just saying earlier, normal wasn't so great to begin with. and they want to go back to the way they were, and we can't. We have to stop. We have to pay attention. What have we learned, and how can we improve who we are and how we deal with people? A big thing that came out of this for us was that we got really creative, and we're very blessed that we were able to do this. But we've grown our program tremendously. We're actually adding 2 staff members because we got creative, but we were very blessed. We look at all the young people we serve, though, and they're not so blessed. And we need to look at what we learned through all of this and how we can apply it. But I hate that we're getting to the end of our time, because this has been so wonderful. We want to continue this conversation with you. And I'm thinking, it might be fun to invite the Reverend Addie Banks, and we have a roundtable discussion about some of the stuff we've been talking about offline. But we love that you came here today, and you've been so informative, but we'd like to end with a fun question. So we're going to ask, this is what we ask everybody when they come on. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
Before I answer this, I just want to say thank you again for having me. This was amazing and beautiful. And so this was definitely a beautiful addition to my day. So thank you both for inviting me and allowing me to have this conversation with you. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a forensic psychologist. So I had this very intense fascination with serial killers.
Okay.
It's okay.
It's all right.
So I used to read a lot of books and start to look at the pathology of criminals. And it's funny now, because I'm still interested in the pathology of not just criminals but people. How do we think? How do we show up? How do we function? So I can see now, although I'm doing something a little different, like I didn't go and become a therapist or a social worker or anything like that, it still has manifested itself in my life. And besides that, I wanted to be a lawyer. So it still was in the justice thing. But I went to work for a few law firms as a legal secretary, because that was my initial training. And if you're a lawyer, don't get upset when I say this, but most of the lawyers I worked for were not happy. And I was like, you're making all these dollars and you don't get to enjoy it because you're always in the courtroom, and then you're always annoyed and frustrated. And I don't want to do that. So that was the end of that. So
no, I hear that. You got to feed your soul and got to hit that sweet spot. Otherwise, it's not worth it. Well, I'm married to a therapist, and she is very interested in watching a lot of stuff about serial killers. In fact, a lot of the shows we watch, we've just gotten into Clarice, which is a spinoff from Silence of the Lambs. So we're constantly watching, so I can relate. But thank you so much for coming. Like I said, we'd love to continue this conversation, in the later episodes, and in the next month or two, let's, do something again. And Shavar and I'll stick around, and we have to say goodbye to you for now, but we'll see you again soon. And thank you so much for being here.
Take care, and thank you so much, and have a wonderful and amazing time.
You too. Take care.
Likewise.
Wow.
I had a lot of questions. I was sitting there like fidgeting. I'm like, I have questions. You said so much.
We definitely have to have her on again.
No, definitely. And I suggest everyone to Google Dr. Raniere Amin, please. There's books, there's podcasts, there's tons of information out there about Dr. Amin. So please do that. But it was good. Yeah.
Well, we're looking at doing some type of training or conference to talk about faith-based trauma and healing. So that's why I mentioned the Reverend Addie Banks, because she's so entrenched in the healing circles, and we were talking about doing something where we can combine those two themes, and so that people can come out of a conference or training and feel some hope.
Yeah, I definitely felt some hope hearing her talk, and how she separated the two things. Whenever she talked about whatever topic, she pulled them apart and explained. So that's helpful, because when you sometimes couple things together, it's kind of difficult to navigate through certain processes. But her separating, like, this is religion, this is how a person is. That for me meant a lot. It meant a lot.
Yeah. It's just so informative. It got me thinking about so much, and I agree. I had so many questions. We'll We're both like unmuting. We're so fortunate that we can speak with people who have this kind of insight and knowledge and just have so much to share. And we definitely will do this again. But it feels so good to be back.
Absolutely.
I've missed this. I know that next week we've got a special show planned.
Yes, we
where
do.
We're going to shed a little more insight into each of us, which I'm excited about.
Likewise.
But as always, it's been a pleasure. And, I thank everybody for watching, everybody for listening. If you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, please contact us. Our information, which we actually should be sharing a lot more often. Well, first subscribe, please, to our YouTube channel. But you can get us at RKATZ, RKATZ, at children'saidnyc.org or
Chevar F, CHEVAR F as in Francis, but leave out the rest of the Francis. So Chevar F at children'saidnyc.org. And you can just reach out to us on social media via Instagram, and that's going to be at the end of our audio version of the show. I'll give you the Instagram, the Facebook, and the Twitter. So thank you guys so much. And we'll even put that in the description. Yeah, those will be there.
Okay, that sounds good. So thank you for being a part of the solution, because as we know, nothing changes if we change nothing. Peace out.